My parents loved my wife more than their own son. She was a pediatric nurse who seemed like an angel with sick children. When I discovered she was having an affair, they defended her and accused me of being paranoid and jealous. The truth, she was a convicted con artist who had been systematically stealing from our family while planning to target my elderly parents next. My name is Alex, and I'm about to tell you how the woman my parents adored more than their own son nearly destroyed our entire family, and how a single phone call exposed the most twisted betrayal I've ever experienced. It started 4 years ago. When I was 29, working as a paramedic in Phoenix, Arizona, the job was demanding but rewarding. I'd always felt called to help people in their worst moments. I wasn't making a fortune. I was proud of what I did and had built a decent life for myself in a small house on the outskirts of the city. That's when I met Isabella at a hospital where I was dropping off a patient. She was a nurse in the pediatric ICU, and watching her with sick children was like witnessing an angel at work. She was gentle, compassionate, had this incredible ability to calm both kids and their terrified parents with just a few words. In a warm smile, Isabella was breathtakingly beautiful. Olive skin, dark hair that caught the light perfectly, and the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. But what attracted me most was her heart. She would stay late to comfort families, volunteer at children's charities on her days off, and talked constantly about wanting to make a difference in the world. These kids deserve every chance at happiness, she told me on our third date, as we walked through a park near the hospital. Sometimes I think I love them more than their own parents do. Is that crazy? I was completely smitten. Here was a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for the most vulnerable people in society. She was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: beautiful, compassionate, selfless, and genuinely good. We dated for 18 months before I proposed. And during that time, Isabella became like a daughter to my parents. My mother, Linda, had always worried that I was too focused on work to find someone special. My father, Robert, was a retired police detective who prided himself on being a good judge of character. They both fell in love with Isabella immediately. "She's perfect for you, honey," my mother would say whenever Isabella's name came up. "She's got such a good heart, and you can see how much she loves you." My father was even more enthusiastic. "The girl's got integrity," he'd say. "You can tell by how she looks you in the eye when she talks. How she treats service workers. How she talks about her patients. She's the real deal, son." Isabella seemed to adore my parents right back. She'd bring my mother flowers every time we visited, ask my father about his old cases, and genuinely seem interested in their stories and opinions. She fit into our family so naturally that it felt like she'd always been there. When I proposed, my parents were more excited than I was. My mother immediately started planning the wedding. My father offered to pay for the honeymoon because he was so happy I'd found such a wonderful woman. The wedding was beautiful, a perfect spring day with Isabella looking radiant in her grandmother's vintage dress. She cried during her vows as she promised to love and support me through everything life threw at us. My parents cried too, so proud and happy that their son had found his soulmate. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," my father said as he hugged Isabella after the ceremony. We couldn't have asked for a better daughter-in-law. The first 2 years of marriage were everything I'd dreamed they would be. Isabella and I bought a larger house together, one with enough space to start the family we both wanted. She continued her work in pediatric nursing, while I kept responding to emergency calls. And we supported each other through the emotional challenges of our demanding jobs. Isabella was particularly close to my parents. She'd call my mother at least 3 times a week, visit them every Sunday for dinner, and always remember important dates like their anniversary and birthdays with thoughtful gifts and gestures. She became the daughter they'd never had, and they spoiled her accordingly. But about 6 months ago, things started to change in ways so subtle, I almost missed them. Isabella began working longer shifts, taking on extra hours that kept her at the hospital well into the night. She said the pediatric unit was understaffed and she couldn't bear to leave when sick children needed her. "These families are going through hell," she'd say when she'd come home exhausted at midnight. "How can I abandon them when they need support the most?" I admired her dedication, even though I missed spending time with her. She also started going out more with her coworkers. saying they needed to decompress after difficult shifts by getting drinks or dinner together. Again, it seemed reasonable. Working with sick children was emotionally draining, and everyone needed ways to cope. But I started noticing inconsistencies. She'd come home smelling like cigarette smoke despite not being a smoker, she'd mention. Conversations with coworkers I'd met who later told me they hadn't worked the shifts she claimed they'd shared. Her phone was always face down. She'd become protective of it in a way she'd never been before. When I tried to bring up my concerns, Isabella would become emotional and accuse me of not understanding the pressure she was under at work. "Do you have any idea what it's like to watch children die?" she'd cry. "I'm trying to save lives and you're worried about me having a few drinks with friends? How can you be so selfish?" The guilt trips worked. I'd apologize for being suspicious and try to be more supportive, even though something in my gut told me things weren't adding up. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago on a Thursday night, when Isabella said she had to work a double shift and wouldn't be home until Friday morning, around 11 p.m. I decided to surprise her by bringing coffee and snacks to the hospital for her and her coworkers. When I arrived at the pediatric ICU, the charge nurse looked confused. "Isabella?" she said when I asked where my wife was. "She's not scheduled tonight. Actually, she called in sick this morning and hasn't been here all day." My blood ran cold. "Are you sure?" She told me she was working a double shift. The nurse checked the schedule again. "No, definitely not here. Is everything okay?" I drove home in a daze, trying to come up with innocent explanations for why Isabella had lied about where she was. Maybe there was a miscommunication about the schedule. Maybe she'd been called to a different unit. Maybe she was covering for a coworker and forgot to tell me. But when I got home, found a credit card statement that had been delivered that afternoon. Isabella handled most of our finances, but this was for a card I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I found charges that made my stomach drop. Hotel rooms, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, charges for 2 people at spas and entertainment. Venues, a jewelry store charge for $3,000 that I definitely hadn't authorized. All over the past 6 months, all on dates when Isabella had told me she was working late or out with coworkers, I stayed up all night staring at those charges, just trying to make sense of what I was seeing. When Isabella came home Friday morning, looking perfectly groomed despite supposedly working an exhausting double shift, I confronted her. "Where were you last night?" I asked, holding up the credit card statement. Isabella's face went white, then immediately shifted to anger. "How dare you go through my mail? Don't you trust me? The hospital said you weren't scheduled to work, and this credit card shows you've been spending thousands of dollars at places. You've never mentioned. What's going on, Isabella?" She broke down crying, which had always been her go-to strategy when confronted about anything. "Alex, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. Don't. Sometimes I need to get away, to have some space to think. I've been treating myself to little escapes because I'm so burned out from work. By yourself. These charges are for 2 people. I've been taking some of the other nurses with me. We all need to decompress together. It was a lie, and we both knew it." But Isabella was a master manipulator. She immediately shifted the conversation to how unsupportive I was being, how I didn't understand her job, how she needed a husband who trusted her instead of spying on her. By the end of the conversation, somehow, I was the one apologizing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. That weekend, when Isabella said she was going shopping with her sister, I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. She drove to an upscale hotel downtown where she met a man I'd never seen before. He was older, well-dressed, and clearly wealthy based on the expensive car he was driving. I watched from across the parking lot as they embraced, kissed, and walked into the hotel together. My world collapsed in that moment. The woman I'd married, the woman my parents adored, the woman who worked with sick children and claimed to have such a compassionate heart, was having an affair. I sat in my car for 2 hours trying to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to storm into that hotel and confront them both. Part of me wanted to drive home and pretend I'd never discovered the truth. But mostly I just felt numb. When I finally got home, I called a private investigator my father had, recommended years earlier for a different matter. I needed to know the full scope of what Isabella was doing before I made any decisions about our marriage. What the investigator discovered over the next 2 weeks was devastating. Isabella wasn't just having an affair. She was essentially living a double life. The man she was seeing was Richard Coleman, a wealthy businessman who owned several car dealerships around Phoenix. She'd been seeing him for 8 months, telling him that she was divorced and working as a nurse to support herself after a difficult marriage. But it got worse. Isabella had been systematically draining our joint accounts and running up credit card debt to fund her relationship with Richard. The $3,000 jewelry charge was for a necklace she'd bought herself to wear on dates with him. Charges were for their romantic getaways. She'd even taken a week off work that she'd told me was a nursing conference, when actually she'd gone to Las Vegas with Richard. The investigator also discovered that Isabella had been lying about working extra shifts for months. Instead, she'd been spending that time with Richard, going to his house, traveling with him, and building a relationship that was far more serious than just an affair. They were planning a future together. Most devastatingly, the investigator found evidence that Isabella was planning to divorce me and marry Richard. She'd been to see a lawyer, had discussed how to maximize her settlement from our divorce, and had even looked at houses with Richard that they could buy together. I was being played by a woman who was already planning her exit strategy. When I confronted Isabella with all the evidence, she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she attacked me with a viciousness I'd never seen from her before. "You want to know the truth?" she snarled, her sweet, compassionate mask completely gone. "I never loved you? You're boring, you make mediocre money, and you have no ambition. Richard is everything you're not: successful, exciting, generous. He can give me the life I actually want. Then why did you marry me? Why did you waste 4 years of my life?" "Because I thought you had potential," she said coldly. "I thought maybe you'd become something more than just a paramedic living in a starter house. But you're content being mediocre, and I'm not content being married to mediocrity." The woman who had cried at our wedding, who had promised to love me through everything, who had convinced my parents she was an angel, was revealing herself to be someone I'd never really known at all. But Isabella wasn't done. "Don't think you're going to come out of this divorce with anything," she continued. "I've documented every way you failed as a husband: your long hours, your emotional unavailability, your lack of ambition. Richard's lawyer says I'll get the house, and half of everything else." That's when I realized Isabella had been planning this betrayal for months, maybe even years. Every late night I'd worked, every time I'd been tired after a difficult shift, every moment when I'd been less than perfect, she'd been building a case against me while secretly building a life with another man. I moved out that night, staying with a friend while I tried to figure out what to do next. But I knew I had to tell my parents what was happening. They'd been so supportive of Isabella, so proud to have her as a daughter-in-law, and I dreaded shattering their illusions about her. When I called to ask if I could come over to talk, my mother immediately knew something was wrong. "What's happened? Honey, is Isabella okay?" "Isabella's fine, Mom, but our marriage is over. I'll explain everything when I get there." The conversation with my parents was one of the hardest of my life. I sat in their living room, the same room where Isabella had spent countless Sunday dinners charming them with her stories about helping sick children, and told them everything: the affair, the lies, the financial manipulation, the planned divorce, everything. My parents' reactions were exactly what I'd expected. My mother cried and kept saying she couldn't believe it. My father got angry and started talking about what he'd like to do to Richard Coleman. But both of them were clearly struggling to reconcile the Isabella they thought they knew with the woman I was describing. "Are you absolutely sure about this, son?" my father asked. "I mean, Isabella seems so genuine, so caring. Could there be some explanation?" I showed them the investigator's report, the photographs, the financial records. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. My mother was devastated. "She seemed to love you so much," she kept saying. "She was so good with the children at the hospital. How can someone fake being that kind of person?" "I don't know, Mom," I said, "but she did." That's when my father's detective instincts kicked in. "Something about this doesn't add up," he said. "If Isabella's been planning this for months, why hasn't she filed for divorce yet? What's she waiting for?" It was a good question, and it led to a discovery that changed everything. My father decided to do some investigating of his own. He started by calling some of his old contacts at the police department to run background checks on both Isabella and Richard Coleman. What he found was shocking. Isabella's real name was Isabella Martinez. She had a criminal record in California for fraud and identity theft. She'd been arrested 3 years before I met her for running a con where she'd pretend to be a nurse, gain access to elderly patients' personal information, and then steal their identities to open credit cards and loans. She'd served 6 months in jail and moved to Phoenix after her release, where she'd somehow managed to get a real nursing license. And Job. But her MO was the same: find vulnerable people, gain their trust, and exploit them financially. Richard Coleman was also not who he appeared to be. He was married, had been for 15 years, and had a history of being targeted by con artists. Because of his wealth and his tendency to have affairs, Isabella wasn't his first side piece, but she might have been the most calculating. But the most shocking discovery came when my father dug deeper into Isabella's employment history. She hadn't been working extra shifts at the hospital. She'd actually been suspended from her job 2 months earlier for stealing medications from the pediatric unit. The hospital was conducting an internal investigation, and criminal charges were likely to follow. All those late nights when she'd claimed to be working with sick children, she'd been unemployed, living off her joint savings and credit cards while carrying on her affair and planning her escape. When my father presented this information to me, I felt sick. "Dad, she's been in our house, around our family, for 4 years. She had dinner with you and Mom every Sunday. You talked to her about your old cases, your experiences. What if she was gathering information to use somehow?" My father's face went gray. "Son, I need to check something." He disappeared into his home office and came back an hour later looking furious. "Alex, she's been asking me questions about financial planning, insurance policies, investment strategies. I thought she was just trying to help you to plan for the future, but now, ... What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking she might have been planning to target us next. Think about it. She knows we own our house outright. She knows about Mom's inheritance from her parents. She knows I have a decent pension. We've been completely open with her about our finances because we thought she was family. It's the idea that Isabella might have been planning to con my parents after destroying me was terrifying. My parents weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. Retirees who had worked hard their entire lives to build security for their old age. The thought of her targeting them was infuriating. That's when my mother surprised us both. "I want to call her," she said quietly. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "No, I need to hear this from her. I need to know if everything I believed about her was a lie." Despite my father's and my objections, my mother called Isabella that evening. She put the phone on speaker so we could all hear the conversation. "Isabella, honey," my mother said, when Isabella answered, "Alex has told us some things that are very upsetting. I was hoping we could talk about what's been happening." Isabella's response was immediate and manipulative. "Oh, Linda, I'm so glad you called. Alex has been acting so strangely lately. I'm really worried about his mental health. He's been accusing me of terrible things, following me around, going through my personal belongings. I think the stress of his job might be affecting his judgment." I watched my mother's face as Isabella painted me as an unstable, paranoid husband who was having a breakdown and making false accusations against his loving wife. "He's been working such long hours," Isabella continued, her voice full of fake concern. "And some of the calls he responds to are so traumatic. I think he might be developing PTSD or something similar. Has he seemed different to you lately?" It was masterfully done. Isabella was preemptively discrediting anything I might have told my parents by suggesting I was having a mental health crisis. If my parents hadn't seen the evidence with their own eyes, they might have fallen for it. But my father had heard. "Enough, Isabella," he interrupted, his voice cold. "We know about Richard Coleman. We know about the credit cards, the hotels, the lies about working late. We know about your criminal record in California and your suspension from the hospital." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought she might have hung up. When Isabella finally spoke, her voice was completely different. Hard, calculated, and without any of the warmth my parents were used to hearing from her. Well, she said, I guess there's no point in pretending anymore. Pretending what? My mother asked, her voice shaking. Pretending that I ever gave? A damn about any of you, Isabella said with shocking cruelty. Did you really think I enjoyed those boring Sunday dinners? Was listening to Robert's old cop stories and Linda's gossip about the neighbors? Did you think I cared about your little middle-class family and your pathetic lives? My mother started, crying, and my father's hands clenched into fists. Isabella wasn't finished. Alex is a loser who will never amount to anything, just like his father. You people have no money, no connections, no value to someone like me. 8. I wasted 4 years of my life pretending to be part of your family, and the only thing I got out of it was access to your son's mediocre finances. Then why did you stay so long? My father asked, his voice dangerous. Because I was building my case for the divorce settlement, Isabella said matter-of-factly. I needed time to establish myself as the perfect wife, so I could claim he abandoned me emotionally and financially. But then I met Richard, and I realized there was no point in squeezing blood from a stone. Why settle for half of Alex's nothing when I could have everything Richard has to offer? The mask had completely come off. The woman my parents had loved like a daughter was revealing herself to be a cold, calculating predator who had manipulated all of us for years. But Isabella saved the cruelest blow for last. Oh, and Linda, she said sweetly, that necklace you gave me for my birthday last year. The one that belonged to your grandmother? I sold it 3 months ago to help pay for a weekend trip to Sedona with Richard. Got decent money for it, too, my mother sobbed. That necklace had been a family heirloom passed down through 4 generations, and my mother had given it to Isabella because she'd considered her the daughter she'd always wanted. Isabella hung up, and we sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, my father spoke. Son, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. We should have listened to your concerns instead of defending her. We should have trusted your instincts. We all fell for it, Dad. She was that good at manipulation. No, my mother said, wiping her tears. We fell for it because we wanted to. Believe that someone could love our son that much. We wanted you to be happy, and we let that cloud our judgment. Over the next few days, my parents completely shifted their support from Isabella to me. They helped me find a better divorce lawyer, offered to let me move back home while I got back on my feet. And most importantly, they cut off all contact with Isabella completely. But they also did something I hadn't expected, started making calls to protect other people from her. My father contacted Richard Coleman's wife to inform her about her husband's affair. He also called the hospital to follow up on their investigation into Isabella's medication theft. My mother reached out to other family members and friends to warn them that Isabella was not who she'd pretended to be. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later when Isabella showed up at my parents' house unannounced, apparently thinking she could manipulate them one more time. My father answered the door, and I watched from the living room window as Isabella tried to turn on the charm. Robert, she said, her voice back to the sweet, caring tone she'd used for years, I think. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I was hoping we could talk about everything that's happened. My father's response was ice cold. There's no misunderstanding, Isabella. We know exactly who you are now. You're a con artist, a thief, and a liar. You used our family for 4 years, and now you're trying to do it again. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said, trying to cry on cue. I loved Alex. I loved all of you. I just made some mistakes. No, my father interrupted. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate and calculated. You stole from my son, you lied to our faces for years, and you tried to manipulate us even after we knew the truth. Isabella's mask slipped again. Fine, she snapped. You can't prove most of what you think you know. And Alex still has to go through a divorce, which means he still has to deal with me. That's when my father smiled, a cold cop smile that I remembered from my childhood. Actually, Isabella, we can prove everything. And you might want to check your messages. The Phoenix Police Department has been looking for you. Isabella's face went white. What are you talking about? The hospital filed charges for the medication theft. There's also an outstanding warrant in California for violating your probation by leaving the state without permission. Richard Coleman's wife has filed charges for fraud and identity theft. Isabella ran to her car without another word, It was the last time any of us saw her. The divorce proceedings were swift once Isabella was arrested. She was too busy dealing with criminal charges to fight the divorce, and she ended up with nothing from our marriage except legal bills. The house, the car, our joint savings, everything stayed with me because her criminal activity voided any claim she might have had. Richard Coleman's wife divorced him and took half of everything, including his car dealerships. He's now facing his own fraud charges related to some business dealings Isabella had convinced him to get involved in. Apparently, she'd been planning to con him too. Just as soon as she'd finished destroying my life, today, 6 months after that, horrible phone call. My relationship with my parents is stronger than it's ever been. They've never stopped apologizing for initially taking Isabella's side. And they've made it their mission to help me heal from the betrayal. God, we were so desperate for you to be happy that we ignored red flags we should have seen, my mother told me recently. We'll never make that mistake again. I've also started dating again, slowly and carefully. Seeing a teacher named Maria, who knew nothing about my past when we met, who has her own life and interests, and who treats my parents with genuine respect rather than calculated charm. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts. When something feels off, when someone's story doesn't add up, and charm feels too good to be true, I listen to that inner voice instead of ignoring it. Isabella tried to destroy my life, my finances, and my relationship with my family. But in the end, her betrayal brought my parents and me closer together and taught us all valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation. Sometimes the people who seem the most trustworthy are the ones you should trust the least. And sometimes the family members who seem to be taking someone else's side are actually just trying to protect you in the only way they know how. Isabella is serving 18 months in prison for multiple charges, and she'll be deported back to California to face additional charges when she's released. Her nursing license has been permanently revoked, and her criminal record will follow her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, I'm rebuilding my life with the support of parents who learned that their son's judgment was better than their own wishful thinking. And that's a happy ending that no con artist can ever take away from me.